Rami, Hirumoxi, Amblebaruchtie, Vimeguain, Valesien, Alcanqui, Almonion, Alethe. El avitrajan Alethés y Rain Meguan el Ardexabai, y Ardexavis el Emilledai, Lebonirte Amblevari Emilledoye, Psaltraji y Daftaji. Lava lerchiami albarges gradis, la albarge baumensis. Hivalerchenon Firea, ax progedon maxadi avion pregensen, Jumexensen y arquilens. Meladis Alethés mulmun. Ichitramons emilledo halmathan alcanqui renisti, traguis amblevaran mavara brigis arquilensen.
Welcome. What you've just heard is classical Alethesian, a constructed language I've been developing over the course of more than a decade. In this video, I'll walk you through its defining principles and its history, both real and in-universe. To understand the rise of Alethesian, we must first examine its foundations. I began world building in late 2014 when I was just 9 years old. What started as a creative outlet gradually became a place to test ideas about human nature. Worlds can be sketched with maps and timelines, but they only become alive through grammar and sound. Language is not merely descriptive. It shapes the way a culture organizes reality. It became clear that internal consistency cannot survive on narrative alone. It must be embedded in the very structure of expression. Alethesian emerged from that necessity. It was designed to reflect a worldview that values structural clarity, conceptual precision, and disciplined reasoning. And from the beginning, it was guided by two core principles. The first is balancing realism with logic. I did not want a language that felt artificial, nor one that drifted into irregularity without reason. Natural languages evolve through accident, erosion, and historical layering. Constructed languages often overcorrect, becoming either mechanically perfect or unnecessarily complex. Alethesian attempts to stand between those extremes. It preserves the feel of historical development, but its systems are internally rational. The second principle is phonosemantic coherence, creating words that sound like their meaning. Harsh clusters may signal negative connotation. Open vowels may signal expansion or brightness. Over time, these tendencies form a pattern. The lexicon begins to feel internally motivated, as though sound and meaning are not arbitrarily paired, but aligned. This principle gives Alethesian a distinct aesthetic identity. In-universe history. Classical Alethesian belongs to the Alethian branch of the Eutrophian language family, and it is the direct ancestor of what is now known as the Theorean language family. With the arrival of Eutrophian-speaking peoples in Alethés at the beginning of the Archaic period, the foundations of Alethesian were laid. These settlers established a network of city-states across the islands, among them Theorai, and gradually intermingled with the indigenous Musi populations. This synthesis reshaped archaic Alethesian, expanding its vocabulary, shifting its phonology under Musi influence, and absorbing Musi literary forms. Over time, political fragmentation and regional isolation led the language to diverge. Distinct dialects emerged across the islands, shaped by local innovation, varying substrate influence, and shifting prestige norms. The late Archaic period saw a technological and intellectual surge. With the invention of the press, the language became a vessel for philosophy and literature, rather than mere trade. The execution of Sophoros, a Theorean philosopher who advanced a radical metaphysics after a psychedelic revelation, ignited a revolution that spread from Theorai across Aletheia, inaugurating the early classical period and the rise of Thereia, a civilization grounded in rational inquiry, liberty, and meritocratic progress. To sustain this new world, the Thereian dialect of Alethesian was standardized, becoming the lingua franca across Thereia. In a period of 96 years, Thereia expanded from the city of Therai into the entire continent of Eutrophia. Alethés eventually diversified into the various daughter languages spoken today. Phonology. The phonetic inventory of Alethesian is tightly integrated with its writing system. The Alethesian script is a semi-featural alphabet. While it functions as a standard phonemic script, many of its letter shapes encode phonetic information such as place of articulation. For example, the letter representing A is a circle, symbolizing an open mouth. All bilabial consonants incorporate some form of an enclosed circle representing the lips. Several alveolar consonants, such as na and ta, visually suggest the tongue curled or raised toward the alveolar ridge. Voicing distinctions and plosives are represented systematically by rotating the letter. These features reflect the broader design philosophy of structural clarity. The shape of a letter is not arbitrary, but systematic. The consonants of Alethesian are
ma, na, nya, na, pa, ta, ka, ka, kwa, fa, sa, sha, ha, hwa, ba, da, ga, ga, gwa, va, va, ya, ra, hwa, la, ya, la, wa, sa, ra.
A notable feature is the systematic alternation between hard and soft realizations of the phonemes.
Pa, ta, kya, ka, kwa, ba, da, ga, ga, gwa.
Hard realizations are plosives and occur after a consonant or before R or S, while soft realizations are fricatives and occur after a vowel or semi-vowel, or word initially. Orthographically, this alternation is not marked with separate letters. The same grapheme represents both realizations. The vowels of Alethesian are
I, U, U, E, O, A.
Alethesian permits a relatively dense syllable structure, allowing syllables of the form C, CV, CCCC, up to 2 consonants in the onset and up to 4 in the coda. However, not every combination of consonants is allowed. The possible clusters are governed by a phonotactic system that restricts which consonants can appear together and in what order. Importantly, certain consonant sequences are treated as single units for the purposes of syllable structure. Clusters such as
Apsa, Aksa, Apra, Akra, Atra, Ampa, Anta, Anka.
function as cohesive phonological units when determining whether a syllable conforms to the CCV-CCCC template. In the writing system, this structural unity is reflected visually. All such clusters have their own dedicated ligatures, as well as some diphthongs. Inflection occurs primarily through the use of suffixes and is highly fusional. Verbs inflect for voice, mood, evidentiality, tense, aspect. Alethesian distinguishes 3 voices, active, middle, and passive, but what makes the system distinctive is how meaning shifts across them. Active and passive are primarily used with transitive verbs, while the middle is typically intransitive. However, the middle can take complements in non-accusative cases, and the choice of case can subtly alter the verb's meaning, creating nuance without introducing new lexical roots. For example, the verb bravenir, with the accusative case, means to save, keep, maintain, while with the preposition l, it means to guard. Some verbs undergo systematic semantic shifts across voices. For example, the verb vie means to have, in the active, to be, in a place, situation, or time, in the middle, and to belong in the passive. The verb die means to lead or to move in the active, to go in the middle, and to be compelled to in the passive. Alethesian distinguishes 3 finite moods and 3 evidential categories, but evidentiality is encoded only within the indicative, resulting in 5 finite combinations in total. The indicative splits into deductive, perceptional, and reported forms, each morphologically distinct. So declarative statements must grammatically specify the source or grounding of the claim. The deductive category historically developed from an earlier inferential form, but its meaning was reshaped by scholarly tradition. What once marked ordinary reasoning from evidence was narrowed and elevated to mark logical derivation, universal generalization, and principled necessity. As a result, philosophical discourse came to distinguish grammatically between contingent inference and formal deduction, embedding the analytic/empirical divide directly into the verb system and making the language especially suited to systematic argument. Outside the indicative, the subjunctive functions as a general irrealist mood, covering possibility, doubt, intention, and condition without evidential marking. The imperative forms its own independent paradigm. In addition to these finite forms, the language includes an infinitive and a participle. Verbs also inflect for two tenses and two core aspectual values, yielding four synthetic tense aspect forms. The opposition is between past and non-past, and within each tense between imperfective and either perfective, in the past, or habitual, in the non-past. This produces a system that is compact but functionally differentiated. The past perfective is called the preterite, and presents an event as a bounded whole, located in the past. It is the narrative form used for completed actions, a single event viewed from the outside. The past imperfective is called the imperfect, and it presents a past situation from within, ongoing, backgrounded, descriptive, or temporally unbounded. In contrast, the non-past distinguishes between imperfective and habitual. The non-past imperfective is called the present, and it expresses present states, neutral present situations, and temporally anchored unfolding events. The non-past habitual expresses dispositional, characteristic, or law-like patterns, what regularly occurs, what holds in general, or what defines a subject over time. General truths and structural regularities are therefore encoded through the habitual rather than the imperfective. Rather than multiplying categories, the system preserves a stable backbone, past versus non-past, crossed with bounded completion in the past and patterned recurrence in the non-past. The result is asymmetrical but controlled, richer differentiation in completed past narration, and a principled split in the present between immediate situation and enduring pattern. Additional aspectual meanings are formed analytically through auxiliary verbs rather than additional inflectional paradigms. Progressive aspect is formed with an auxiliary meaning, be, plus a gerund or participle form, explicitly marking an event as unfolding at a reference time. Perfect aspect is formed with an existential auxiliary plus a participle, expressing that a completed event exists as a fact relative to the reference time. Future reference is expressed through a prospective auxiliary meaning, go, plus the infinitive. These auxiliaries combine compositionally and carry evidential marking as the highest finite verb in the clause. In this way, the language maintains a minimal synthetic core while allowing precise temporal and aspectual layering when needed. Finally, verbs do not inflect for person and number in the conventional way. Instead, the system distinguishes between two grammatical persons, V1 and V2, forcing interpretation to rely on context. These two forms are organized around proximity rather than simple participant indexing, and they simultaneously encode clusivity and formality. The first form, V1, is the proximate. It is used for first-person singular, first-person exclusive plural, informal second person, and for reference understood as this or the latter. It functions as the default verbal form when no marked distance or social elevation is implied. The second form, V2, is the obviate. It is used for inclusive we, formal second person, and for reference understood as that or the former. In religious texts, deities speaking in the first person also use the obviate form, marking transcendence and elevated distance even within self-reference. This reduction is intentional. Instead of maintaining a three-way person system that already loosely reflects proximity, Alethés sharpens the contrast into a binary opposition, proximate versus obviate. Rather than redundantly tracking speaker, addressee, and third party, The verb marks only what is structurally significant, whether a referent is within the immediate sphere of discourse or positioned outside it. By consolidating clusivity, formality, and narrative distance into the same opposition, the system avoids parallel subsystems and strengthens relational encoding. The result is not simplification for its own sake, but refinement, a focused contrast that prioritizes perspective over enumeration. Nominals in Alethesian form a single inflectional class. Nouns, pronouns, adjectives, numerals, and participles all take the same declensional suffixes, creating a unified and predictable system. All decline for 2 numbers, singular and plural, and for 6 cases: nominative, accusative, genitive, dative, ablative, and instrumental. Alethesian is fundamentally verb initial. The neutral declarative clause follows VSO order. The finite verb comes first, followed by the subject in the nominative and the object in the accusative, with indirect objects and other obliques following in their respective cases. Because case marking already encodes grammatical relations, word order is not needed to signal subject versus object. Instead, deviations from VSO are reserved for discourse purposes. A simple neutral clause would look like this.
Ma vero aprivosa.
The man sees the truth. Information structure is positional. One constituent may be placed before the verb to establish the topic, the frame of discussion. Separately, the first constituent after the verb is interpreted as focus, carrying new, contrastive, or definitional weight. This allows philosophical precision without additional particles. For example,
Aprivosa ma vero.
as for the truth, the man sees it.
Yamaia prosens.
It is wisdom that is virtue. In copular clauses, Alethesian uses an overt copula in all tenses. The predicate nominal appears in the instrumental case, reflecting role or state rather than simple equation. This makes definition structurally explicit. For example,
Iepsaltagenta malantis prosensa.
a philosopher is a lover of wisdom.
Laia psaltagenta xilis.
A philosopher is not a fool. Subordination is introduced by the single particle
Ma.
which functions both as complementizer and relativizer. Finite complement clauses retain normal VSO structure internally, and mood distinguishes asserted from non-asserted propositions. For example,
Ampa vero ma verma privosa.
the man claims that truth exists.
Xafa vero ma mai privosa.
The man doubts that truth exists. Relative clauses are externally headed and use ma with a gap inside the clause.
Vero mama alman.
The man who sees the woman.
Privosan matrama psaltragenti.
The truth that philosophers seek. Conditionals use ile, if, with the subordinate clause in the subjunctive.
Ile trama vero privosan, marxa prosensen.
If the man seeks truth, he finds wisdom. Across discourse, the first post-verbal focused noun phrase becomes the discourse center until overridden. This interacts with proximate/obviate marking on the verb, allowing reference to remain stable across multiple clauses without repeated pronouns. In extended argumentation, this keeps logical chains clear even when multiple abstract entities, truth, belief, claim, objection, are under discussion. You've seen the structure, the sounds, the script, the evidential system, the way perspective replaces person. Alethesian wasn't built to be clever. It was built to test an idea. What happens if clarity is mandatory? Classical Alethesian is just one moment in that experiment. The real test is what happens when it changes, when sound laws blur distinctions, when paradigms collapse, when daughter languages reinterpret the system instead of preserving it. That's where this goes next. A language isn't convincing because it looks complete. It's convincing if it can survive time.